Let's not beat around the bush, Steve Rogers' new Avengers: Infinity War look is pretty great. The beard, in conjunction with the whole rough-and-tumble worn-out uniform thing, it's working so well that Cap's beard itself was the most talked-about part of Infinity War's promotion according to social media analysts. But there's more to Infinity War's Captain America than just aesthetics. It signals a major shift in Steve Rogers' story that reverberates down to the core tenets of his character, a departure from his starched red, white, and blue cleanliness. As Hannibal Buress deadpanned in Spider-Man: Homecoming, "I'm pretty sure that guy's a war criminal now." And all of this in conjunction with actor Chris Evans' recent announcement that he plans on stepping back from the character in the next year. Well, it's safe to say Cap's in a bit of a weird spot. But here's the thing, Steve's comic book history is packed with this exact sort of identity-shutting, shield-dropping crossroads and disillusionment, and these moments have actually been key in defining the way we understand and relate to Captain America from the very beginning. What we're seeing on screen now is just a small piece of a much bigger, much more complicated puzzle. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Marvel Comics defining a legend. Unlike the majority of his fellow Golden Age holdovers, Captain America lacks the clear definition of a rock-solid core or easily recognizable mantra. Though he's roughly as old as they are, Steve doesn't have Superman's concise motto "if truth and justice" or Batman's never-ending war on criminals. His creators, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, set out to ensure that his primary defining characteristic was an unyielding loyalty to the American dream, which is exactly as subjective and esoteric as it sounds. On top of that, he has a built-in stopgap, a mid-60s revival, care of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Avengers. These two puzzle pieces make Steve's history a minefield of retcons, heel turns, and transformative contradictions, and, for the most part, that's by design. Questioning his purpose and place in the bigger picture became a major narrative through-line in Captain America stories, almost immediately following his return to the spotlight. After all, the dream he fought for back in the 40s had changed dramatically over the years. It didn't make a lot of sense to a new generation, a new audience that was either too young to have experienced life in the heart of World War II or old enough to have been touched by the encroaching cynicism and conflict of Vietnam. The creative minds behind Captain America titles had to start acknowledging that dissonance early on to keep Steve's books profitable and on the shelves. Though, as you'd probably guess, diving headlong into an existential quagmire directly wasn't the best way to go about things, at least not right away. It took 3 years after the 60s reboot for Steve's first major crisis to make landfall with Tales of Suspense. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Marvel Comics. Here's the story. After having dated Sharon Carter, who he at the time knew only as Agent 13, for a few months, Steve decided it was absolutely true love. He took her on a date and, in maybe the most awkward romantic turn in Captain America history, tried to pop the question. Sharon, unsurprisingly, rejected him. Heartbroken, Steve promptly, publicly unmasked himself, a first in Cap history, and retired in a fit of pure 60s melodrama that, unsurprisingly, didn't last. The instant the news broke that Cap was no longer in the picture, a series of pretenders to the throne stepped forward, crafting their own Cap cosplay looks and jumping into the fray. They all wound up, at best, making a huge mess of things or, at worst, hurt pretty badly. Feeling guilty about the carnage his absence had unintentionally wrought, Steve begrudgingly returned to action. He even engineered an extremely convoluted crackpot scheme to get everyone to forget his identity as Steve Rogers, involving staged funerals, dummies, and lifelike latex masks. The most obvious end result was Cap reborn yet again, Steve Rogers back in the good fight, stars and stripes and all. But the subtext of the moment, and the thing that actually moved the needle in terms of Cap's ongoing story, was a pretty strong argument that Steve Rogers himself was as important to Captain America as the name and mantle itself. It was a thesis statement that Captain America comics would continue to stress test for years to come, a flag planted on the hill. Steve Rogers is more than just some old baby-faced grandpa in red, white, and blue. Steve Englehart, Sal Buscema, Marvel Comics. Enter Nomad. The next major flashpoint for Steve's slow-burning identity crisis was a bit more confident and direct in its approach. It came 7 years later in 1974, when the Comics Code Authority had started loosening its chokehold on what was or wasn't appropriate for funny books, and the fear about Steve being too unrelatable for kids had, mostly, abated. Steve had just come through the original Secret Empire by Steve Englehart and Sal Buscema, a story where he was forced to confront a conspiracy that led him all the way to a corrupt Oval Office. a thinly veiled response to the real-world Watergate scandal. He was suddenly confronted with the reality that the needs of the government and the needs of the people could be completely thrown out of alignment. The dream was not immune to darkness and greed. So, thoroughly disillusioned and unable to justify standing up for an ideal he believed to have been tainted from the inside out, Steve cast away his Captain America identity in favor of a new one, Nomad, the man without a country. Steve Englehart, Sal Buscema, Marvel Comics. It all sounds